Good morning and welcome to AM Prime on WESN. I'm Naomi Nish. This morning we are turning our attention to the disturbing rise in gender-based violence. Carrying on this conversation in Trinidad and Tobago, it's an issue that has become even more urgent as our nation witnessed multiple femicides and brutal attacks against women within just a few weeks. These incidents unfolded during the 16 days of activism to end gender-based violence, raising serious questions about the effectiveness of our interventions, the gaps in state protection, and the deeper cultural attitudes that continue to endanger women's lives. Joining me this morning to help unpack these realities is Dr. Gabrielle Hosein, Senior Lecturer at the Institute for Gender and Development Studies at the University of the West Indies. Good morning, Dr. Hosein, and welcome.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for taking the time this morning. So I just want to get some context. You've written powerfully about the string of femicides and assaults we've seen in recent weeks. How do you interpret what this pattern is telling us about the current state of gender-based violence in Trinidad and Tobago?
Thanks for taking up this issue in the context of 16 days of activism to end gender-based violence, which is meant to raise awareness but also help people see the need for us all to commit to ending violence overall, but especially violence against women. I think that we have to understand that the society itself is becoming more violent. We can certainly see that in the rise of murders. And as police commissioners have pointed out in the past, femicides or men's killing of women has remained fairly consistent as a proportion of murder. And so the overall responsibility of the society is to reduce violence overall. And that requires a range of approaches, not just excessive policing, but also requires us paying attention to what's happening in terms of unemployment, in terms of things like social services, mental health, gangs and gang interruption, and so on. And so there are a wide people who are doing this work, everyone from police, those in police youth clubs, to those in NGOs know that you really do need an approach that isn't just about policing. And to understand that what's happening in families is linked to these wider challenges in the society, even though men's violence against women has its own specific causes that we do need to address themselves.
In several of these cases, women sought help, like getting restraining orders, police intervention, but somehow that still wasn't enough in their cases. Now, with regard to these systemic failures, why aren't these protective mechanisms working? What is your opinion on that?
So I think those are excellent questions, and those have been addressed quite a lot. Improvements in the system that responds to orders of protection and so on. But my piece yesterday, which is open access in the Newsday, was really trying to move the discussion in a way that focuses also on the need to reduce perpetration. And it was on the one hand, about recognizing that there have been 2 murder-suicides in the past month. But also, if you read it, you will see that I was also highlighting that there were teenage girls who were harmed in the last month, raped getting into a taxi, that there were women who were killed, we don't know by whom, shot in the head and left in the side of the road, that there are women who have been assaulted in the context of a robbery and killed. And so what I wanted to emphasize is that we cannot reduce this issue of men's violence against women simply to what happens in families and relationships, and simply in relation to when women seek orders of protection. The state has to always do more. There's an argument that the state has done enough for women and maybe needs to do more for men, but the state has never done enough for women that follows through on the issue of violence against women. For example, there's been increasing conversation that women shouldn't have to seek orders of protection, which is a civil route, that the police should criminalize violence against women and deal with it as a crime, for example. And of course, there are very low conviction rates. Women fall out of the system because it becomes so difficult to get through the system when they are experiencing the court system, that is. And so conviction rates are very slow compared to the 10,000 women a year that are seeking orders of protection. But the issue is much, much broader than that. And when I wrote that column, I sat down and I looked at the newspaper stories for 2025, and they were gruesome. They were women killed in every way, shape, and form. Women raped, not just killed, but women raped, regardless of where they are, whether they're in their home or in the street or going to work or going to school. And so the column was a call in this moment, but at all moments, really to men. Men are living their lives like everybody else, but this struggle has been led by women and by victims and has been victim-centered. And what we want to do is to now also get the population to pay attention to the necessity of ending perpetration, which of course the women's movement have been saying for a long time, and also that this is an issue rooted in men's relations with women, and to begin to ask more of men, or to continue to ask more of men to play a much greater role that they're doing in ending perpetration, not just dealing with how the state deals with these crimes.
Now, as you mentioned, the whole aspect of men getting more involved in ending this type of violence, and then especially in your piece asking, where are the men?
Yes.
What type of accountability are you looking for men to take? And, in practical terms, let's say, what does meaningful leadership from men actually or would look like?
That's a really, really great question. So, first of all, I think we need to together challenge narratives that ask women to avoid danger. There's constant narratives to women about how they should curtail their lives, how they should be aware of the signs and the red flags. I think we need to start talking to men and telling men that they need to hear when men around them are saying things that are sexist, that are predatory, and that sound dangerous, and that men themselves now, not just saying to women to micro-control our lives in order to survive, but telling men themselves that they now need to hear those and to say something about it, whether they say something to employers, whether they say something to men themselves, whether they say something in football groups, WhatsApp groups, or to the police, so that in the micro aspects of their lives, they are calling out what they are hearing and what they are seeing, and saying that they are not going to support this, that they're not going to participate in this. And there are men that are doing this. And the more men that do this is the more that masculinity will shift, because it will, men will now understand that harmful behavior is not cool with other men. It's not safe to be that way with other men. Men will not tolerate it, and they will not consider it part of the norms of masculinity. It's not funny, and men will begin to find ways to call that out. So that is the first thing. Secondly, I think that where it is we identify perpetrators, for example, we really need to have perpetrator intervention programs. And that is something that has worked well, for example, in Guyana and Grenada. We had it at one point in Trinidad and Tobago with the Partnership for Peace, but we need to return to mandated perpetrator programs. And these don't just management. Men's violence against women is not about anger. Men's violence against women is about a belief that you have the right to do to women whatever it is you want. And their pain and the harm caused is of no consequence to you, and indeed is of little consequence in our society. So we must address gender norms, entitlement, etc., in things such as perpetrator programs. I also think that, there are NGOs across Trinidad and Tobago, the Shelter, Coalition Against Domestic Violence, Conflict Women, community-based organizations across Trinidad and Tobago in which women are performing the majority of labor in keeping families and communities together, in dealing with issues of conflict. And I think just men happily living their lives, but need to play more of a role, as many do, but play more of a role in what's called that third shift, that community responsibility for helping families, learning about helping with conflict, learning how to do workshops, learning how to provide counseling, and just being there to support NGOs who are primarily women's labor. So I would say to men, call up these organizations and say, what can we do? What can we learn also? Because these are women who've been doing this for decades. What can we learn, and what can we do, and what role can we play? And these are just 3 very short examples of what you can do in your own life, what you can do in terms of helping out civil society and NGOs that are trying to hold our society together, and what you can do in terms of advocating for programs such as perpetrator programs that not only help men to secure wellness in themselves, but also deal with issues of overall gender inequality and the injustice of a society that allows men to believe that they have a right to be dominant over women.
So based on what you're saying, then, this whole fight to end the gender-based violence against women, we should really be targeting the men.
Well, a societal solution involves multiple approaches and also multiple levels. So there are levels at which we need to hold the state accountable. There are levels at which we need to support those organizations at community grassroots organizations, and also the kinds of CSOs that we civil society organizations that we're more familiar with. There is a level at which those need to happen, and also a level of personal accountability. I've been in so many spaces in the last decades where things are said and women have to be the ones to say, actually, we have to speak out against this. Somebody has to say no. We talk about men and we may praise them, but we don't want to highlight when they are violent or when their reputation also involves being a perpetrator. We reproduce silences. So that's the individual level. But yes, my point in this column is that society, state, and women are overwhelmed by the extent of men's violence against women. And I use the words men's violence against women because we have to make men visible. We have to name the problem. And the problem isn't men themselves. Men are born human beings like women, are born innocent human beings. What happens is that over time, our social norms create a world in which overwhelmingly by the hundreds of millions across the world, women experience men's violence of all forms, and not just physical violence and not just in the home, but sexual violence. And sexual violence, men's sexual violence, is something that we don't speak about enough. We may speak about physical violence, verbal, emotional violence, and so on, family violence, domestic violence, but we don't speak about the extent to which sexual violence is ubiquitous in girls and women's lives, either as an experience or a threat that we all live every single day of our lives. And this is where men now need to see that the world that women exist in, the world that women are imprisoned in, requires masculinity overall to change. And I want to be clear here. I am not saying that all men are like this. I know progressive men I know, average men who are not violent, normal guy. I'm not saying that this is all men. What I am saying is that this could be any man that chooses to be this way. Any man. The taxi driver that raped the 17-year-old girl going to school in the last month could be any man. And women cannot live in a world in which we don't know which man it may be, whether in or out of a relationship, whether on the street or in our workplace, whether in politics, right, where there are many men who are predatory, or whether it is in law chambers or whether it is in the state sector. We just cannot live like this. And so it is a call to men to reach out and to say, what can I do? And, the thing is, just to end this, the internet is available. There's so much on the internet. You just have to look up what can men do to end violence against women, and there's so much information out there. And there are men who have power in their communities. There are men who have power in the business sector. There are men who have power in their gangs even, who have to come to some point of saying, there is a point at which what is going on with women has gone too far. And there is a responsibility that we have abdicated for our brothers and for making sure that this level of threat and violence against women in all forms and in all places, that it needs to end. And there is a role that we have to play. And I think coming to understand yourself in this way as a man, in the way that so many women think, gosh, we have a responsibility for doing more after our work and our families, for volunteering, for helping, and so on. I think this is part of the transformation necessary.
Yeah. And one of the things that I did notice about what you wrote in your piece, you wrote that simply being a woman in Trinidad and Tobago, at home, online, in public, it's a dangerous thing. And I think shifting society where the focus has been fair in most women, how do we get to that point where we can shift that norm in society where women are scared just to walk, go for a run, be in the streets past a certain hour when it gets dark, etc.?
Yeah, well, it is a combination of a number of things. So you do need to have, for example, public campaigns, and the public campaigns need to be very clear that men do not have a right. Do not have a right over women, do not have a right to treat them as they choose, do not have a right to violate them, to harm them. We need public campaigns that are extremely clear in their messaging, on the basis of just the newspaper reports over 2025. And that's the first thing. The second thing, as I said, is that we do not have sufficient programs that address trauma, mental health, substance abuse, etc. in men, but at the same time are holding norms of masculinity accountable for the way, and those can't be done separately. Any programs with men have to tackle the idea that men have a right to a particular kind of dominance and access to women's bodies. I think also that there are a variety of ways, and we are increasingly getting there. We need sexual harassment legislation. We need workplace policies, and increasingly workplaces have policies that hold men accountable for harassment and discrimination. For example, I want to be clear that that all the political parties should have sexual harassment policies and should be able to say to young women, for example, that are in those spaces, that sexual harassment is something that they do not support. I think that we need meaningful approaches in schools, sports, community spaces, and so on. And I know that these kinds of discussions are built into the programs that are happening. For example, as I mentioned, police youth clubs, which do a lot around violence interruption, and so on. But I think what we are looking for is an overall societal shift in the way that we speak about men's violence against women that fundamentally names this as a problem perpetrated by men, as a men's problem, not a women's problem, not a women's issue, as a men's issue. As a men's issue because, as I said in my column, just in the last month, the range of ways that women are violated speaks beyond relationships, all right? Not just, relationships gone wrong or women wanting to leave and men not wanting them to leave because they don't believe women have a right to decide when and under what conditions they will be in a relationship or not. The violence is happening when homes are raided by bandits. The violence is happening on the street by women who are traveling, and girls. The violence is happening in homes by women and girls who are experiencing sexual abuse. It is pervasive. It is multifaceted, and it is a problem in which women in general are at the mercy of any man. So men as a category, and it is therefore a responsibility and a conversation that we need to have, saying to men, if this is about masculinity and men will really only listen to other men, then what is the role that men are going to play? Because we have reached a point where this problem has gone too far and has gone far for too long, and its severity and its gruesomeness have surpassed the social norms that we should be comfortable with today.
Now, I just want to quickly, bring together everything that you said just now, and if you can, list or outline the three most urgent steps that you think the state as well as society must take right now that would assist in just mitigating this issue.
Right. So the first that I would argue would be meaningful perpetrator programs. That is when a perpetrator at some point in the system comes to the attention of the state that there is an investment in perpetrator programs that deal with what is happening with men. Men need to be well before they will not be violent. And so that is one thing that I court-mandated perpetrator programs. The second thing is that I would argue that in schools and in sports groups and in community spaces that there are programs, particularly in schools, and in fact, the health education program provides a basis for violence prevention messaging to be nationwide in schools. The last government refused to approve changes to the Health and Family Life Education program that included components to prevent gender-based violence. And I want to call on this government to approve those components in a revised Health and Family Life Education program so that gender-based violence prevention can be done in schools. And then finally, I would argue that we cannot rely on the state to change a society. Responsibility for the society rests on each of us. It doesn't matter if you are a taxi driver. It doesn't matter if you're selling doubles. It doesn't matter if you're a CEO. Each man in the society has responsibility for his brothers. It is tough. It is unwanted. Men would have, probably have no idea where to start, but men know that this is a problem, and they know that it has been defined as a women's issue. They know that it is a problem in which men are dangerous to women and to other men, and it is time that men see themselves as having a responsibility, whether that happens in their families, amongst their brethren, in their groups, on the taxi stand. This is an issue that men need to see themselves as individually responsible for, so that the message is men do not have a right to harm women. And where they do harm women, men will play a role in making sure that there are social consequences, that men are excluded, that men are not tolerated, that men are reported, that the tolerance in male spaces for this, in WhatsApp groups, etc., that this now becomes ended, that a is drawn. And we need men on the front line playing this role.
Dr. Hosein, thank you so much for sharing that and for bringing such clarity and urgency to this conversation.
Thank you. I appreciate you having me.
Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you. Bye. Thank you.
So, all right, that was Dr. Gabrielle Hosein on this pressing issue. This is a conversation that we've had a few times in the past couple weeks as, you know, the 16 days of activism against the ending of violence against women and girls continue. I believe that it would have ended this week or is about to end this week. So I think even after it ends is something that we ought to continue having conversations about and continue advocating against and finding ways to definitely see change happen, right? So we're going to take a quick break now and we will come back. Stay with us. Bye-bye.